Welcome, presented by Bet365. We are part of the Action Network. I am Chad Millman, Chief Content Officer of the Action Network. We have our favorite recurring guest on the show today. Joining me to do this podcast today, my co-host, my companion, my compadre, my BFF, professional bettor, Simon Hunter. Hello, Simon.
How we doing, Chad?
Simon, I don't ever want you to be lonely. I know you always have me. But today, we also have our favorite recurring guest, two-time Super Bowl champion, 11-year NFL veteran, host of the wildly popular Greenlight podcast, friend of the show, Chris Long. Yay.
So lonely sometimes, you know?
I
You
don't
can
believe it.
you're looking at a couple guys with successful podcasts. We're still lonely.
Yeah, well, I'm old and one of my kids doesn't live at home, and one of my kids is a teenager who would rather not live at home. And so I have excuses to be lonely.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
guys are, in your 30s. Chris, you got a young family. Simon
Yeah.
is rich and, relatively famous in certain circles.
Right.
I don't know why either you
He
two
shouldn't be
fuckers would ever be
lonely. He
lonely.
shouldn't be lonely. You and I have excuses, but he
Yeah,
should.
women love professional sports bettors that have podcasts.
They do. They
love
do. They do. Isn't that funny that that's one group of people that probably doesn't get any more girls because of what they do. You know what I mean? Like, women are just not into professional sports betting, are they?
No, I just always get the side eye, and the girl's like, "You must think you're so cool." And it's like, I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't work the same.
yeah.
You know what else women aren't into? Professional sports writing. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I can tell you that right now.
That's got to be another peg down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, there's nothing lonelier. Talk about lonely. There's nothing lonelier than the bar at a Marriott hotel on a Sunday night after you've just finished covering Chris Long, and like you write your
St. Louis
story
Rams.
and the St. Louis Rams, and like
Yeah.
you're at the Edward Jones Dome or whatever that was, and then
Yeah, the Drury Inn right next to
yeah,
Edward Jones.
exactly.
Got a
And Chris,
deadline, and you're like, don't you want to hear about Greg Williams calling more cover two?
oh my God, dude. And like you'd sit in that press box, you'd write 800 crappy words about some game that is no different than any other game. Then you go to that goddamn hotel. You're waiting for a call from an editor who's going to say, hey, can you fix this? Hey, can you find a quote? I'm like, what am I going to fucking do? Am I going to call Chris Long right now at his house and see if he can give me a better quote than what he gave me after the game?
It's 2 a.m.
It's fucking terrible.
Yeah, and everybody just pillages your intellectual property and regurgitates it the next day, because the start of the chain is the writers. You know what I mean? Like, the writers are the first ones in, and then everybody else takes a bite the next day. So it's like you got this thankless job.
I agree with you. Thank you for recognizing that. It's actually, you know what? This is a good transition to a fun game that, Chris, you don't know we're going to play today. But we're going to ask you to translate the coach cliche. Matt Mitchell and I came up with a bunch of cliches that we want you to translate. Beautiful. But first, as a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays. And they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. Also, catch every episode of The Favorites live on YouTube. For those enjoying on YouTube, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to the Action Network YouTube page. All right. So NBA finals are starting today or tonight, and we got Chris here. We don't want to not give picks for the NBA finals. Chris, I know you've been thinking about, I know Simon's been talking to a lot of pros. Obviously, we've been doing an incredible amount of coverage on Action Network. If people are not listening to Matt Moore and the Buckets podcast. It is so brilliant. It is our fastest growing podcast. It is nailing the analysis of these games, and it is so much fun to listen to. Definitely do that. Simon, give me your take. What are you hearing from the pros?
Yeah, I would say most people, shockingly, if they've been listening to sports media, I think most people are talking about the Celtics are a better team, right? They model them out better. I believe they're, only team with 20 losses in the playoffs this year. Like, they just were great all season. But the interesting thing is you talk to the professional bettors and it's really torn. It's not really, they're not all just buying in on this Boston team, right? Even though Boston is what, minus 230 at a lot of books, Chad. Like, that's a big number for a serious price before they've even played one game here. So really interesting talking to pros, because going into it, I thought everybody would be on the Luka, Kyrie, Dallas train. It's like basketball. At the end of the game, when there's 3 minutes to go, there's only 5 dudes on the court. And if you have two killers, legitimate killers in basketball, it's game over. Like, if you have the LeBron Wade combo, it's impossible to stop. And that's what I feel like we have here with Kyrie and Luka. So yeah, there's gonna be games where Boston will do their thing, right? They'll shoot their threes, Shad, they'll hit their threes. And I think a lot of people view that as they could easily win this series, right? If they're hitting their threes, they'll win this. But I think most of us know how it gets in the playoffs, right? Guys get tight. It gets really, they pull you into the mud. Doesn't matter if it's basketball or football. They pull you down in the mud and they know your best tendencies, right? There are no secrets. And to me, we've had a couple NBA players on this podcast, talking to them, there is no great defense to stop great offense, right? Your favorite player, Michael Jordan, the glove, he laughed at him, saying the glove was like, I could stop him. It's like the greatness in basketball, you just can't stop the greatness on offense. And that's how I feel here with Luka. So for me, I like to have fun betting these. You've already missed the good future market, unless you want to take them at, plus 200 on some books. I get it. I'm going to bet them to win in 6. So 4-2 series price. You can get that at plus, 1,000 plus 1,200 some books. That to me is a fun bet to make here on Dallas. And I like this team. I just love Luka. And I think he's the best player in the world right now. To me, that's got to count for something.
Chris,
I'm pulling
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm pulling for the Mavs. I just can't. I'm not anti-Boston. I played there the whole thing, but Boston's had so much fun. So I want to see other teams win. And I also think it's fun that every time lately Dallas has had great professional sports teams outside the Cowboys. And I kind of love that the pressure gets put on the Cowboys. So I'd love to see, you even heard Dak say something about it. Dak was like, oh, I guess that's more pressure on us. Like, I would love to see the Mavs get a win. I'm a Mark Cuban fan. I also I kind of liken the Luka thing to me and Ryan Russillo were talking about this, like, who is Luka like in the NFL, from a quarterback standpoint, because in the NBA you get cleaner parallels with the narratives, right? And Luka not being able to get over the hump, people questioning him. It's kind of like a Lamar Jackson in the playoffs thing until this year. Like, it's kind of like a Justin Herbert. Like, when is this generational talent going to bear fruit? I'm excited to see him, join the ranks of the guys that got championships, and he'd be the reason why. And then Kyrie's got to be one of the best wingmen of all time. And I'm not talking about like a wing. I'm talking about like a Robin. If you look at where he's popped up and what he's added to those situations, man, you can't say the Mavs would be here without him. I mean, there's been games where Luka would go cold and then he'd just take over. And it'd be like he'd start the game and then Luka would finish it. And to your point, Simon, like having two guys that can close it out. If one's a little cold, the other one can pick up the slack. So I'm going to bet Dallas full series and just hold on for dear life. This will be the last thing I bet for a while, because I'm not doing baseball. I'm not doing the Olympics unless you guys talk me into it. But I'm going to take the Mavs.
It's interesting, Simon. We had Josh Richardson of the Heat on the podcast last week, and I thought he was great. And the one thing that we didn't press him on, and maybe Chris can speak to this as a former professional athlete, the Kyrie transformation, the Kyrie narrative of being a heel, being a guy who went from team to team to team, was so disruptive, was a guy that a lot of teams didn't want to invest in. to all of a sudden being a guy that has transformed his reputation and become, like Chris just said, the perfect wingman to what Luka is doing, and the way Luka has embraced him and the way they play off each other. He will do nothing in the first half, and then when he senses it, he will go off exactly when he needs it. For Chris, what is it like to have a mercurial, generationally great talent on your team? How do you manage that as a player?
Like someone like Aaron Donald.
I can count a couple guys that I thought of in that echelon.
Yeah.
I mean, like Aaron Donald being the obvious one. And one of my biggest regrets was not staying healthier at the end of my tenure in St. Louis, because we had such a great line and Aaron was a big part of it. But obviously I got banged up and then released 2 years later. So me and Aaron barely crossed over when it came to like me being at my best. And with Aaron on the team, it frees up a lot for other people, obviously. So you get singles, where the slide's going, where they're going to pay attention. But one of the hidden downsides of having somebody like that on your defensive line is the ball's going to come out quick. A lot of people be like, hey, Aaron Donald, that's going to help everybody. And it does in certain scenarios. But you enter a game where Aaron Donald's on the docket from a offensive game planning standpoint, and they're going to get the ball out maybe 2/3 as slow. You know what I mean? Like they're going to speed it up. So if snap to release is 2 seconds, they're going to be 1.5. And so a lot of the time you're going to get into a game and be like, man, I'm rushing my ass off. I know Aaron's on the other side of me. Like, what's going on here? But their bubble screens, his RPOs, is get the ball out quick. And so it can affect the team in a way that makes it more challenging for the guys around him in some scenarios. But ultimately, it's huge having a guy like that on your team, and it takes pressure off of you. I just think about, like, if I were a basketball player and Luka were on my team, I could just play my role. I can not try to be anything bigger than I am. I don't feel like I have to be the guy to make the play. And I think that can be pretty freeing to allow people like play their roles. And in football, it's the same thing. When defenses get into trouble, people are trying to do too much, right? And when you have a guy like that on the side of the ball with you, you're going to do your job, and you're going to focus on doing just that, because you know that the guy that makes the special plays is lined up, 15 feet to my right. And so I've had guys like that. I've had guys like Robert Quinn opposite me, and Robert Quinn obviously helped a great deal. And people always ask, as kind of a sidebar, what's more beneficial, having a great rusher inside or having a great rusher opposite you? And as good as it is to talk about these bookends, I think having a guy inside is truly transformational for an edge rusher. I also got to play with Fletcher Cox late in my career. And Fletcher Cox is the perfect type of superstar to play with, because he's so team oriented. And, there were times where Fletcher, it didn't matter who would get home. He knew he was creating. He didn't have to be the one to make the play, and you could make plays off of him. So, having guys like that on your team can create challenges, certainly, because people are going to game plan differently. But the net positive effect of that is huge, because it allows you to do your job and not be the star. Because I've had to be the star before. When I was in St. Louis, I was one of the stars. And coming to the ballpark every week is way different when you feel like you've got to be the one to make a play. The pressure can be pretty great.
I wonder if that's
off what you're saying, though, Chris. It push up the middle, right? That's a big thing you're talking about here, where there's some quarterbacks that love to step up, right? Where there's other quarterbacks that love to go outside. Yes. I'm sure at the end, those quarterbacks are right. You're like, wow, this could be a nice game for me, where if I just hold my edge, I'm going to be picking up some sacks here. And, like you're saying, the players make the difference. I have so many questions, but before we go too far, not that I'm going to give Chad a hard time about his Kyrie take, but you're in football. Is it crazy how the media can paint you a certain way, where Kyrie left Boston shit on this man like you wouldn't believe. Everyone made him a crazy person, right? Yeah. He goes to the Nets. I mean, again, we're not here to get into vaccine talks. I'm vaccinated. Yeah. Chad here got vaccinated. We all did the thing. Yeah. Kyrie didn't want to do it, right? And at the time, it was a bad look. Like it was. We all can agree. The way he was going about it, it was bad. But even guys on his team, like KD talked about it, it's like he just wants to play basketball. Like Kyrie, everyone's acting like he's this crazy off-court guy. It's like, at the end of the day, he's just a hooper. He just wants to play. So from your perspective, is it wild how like a media can really shape our views on players, right? Like,
well, I think nowadays players get evaluated for their play on the field or on the court, but also we have a voice. So we express ourselves and we take a side of an issue, and a lot of times these are polarizing issues, and so that might not line up perfectly with the conception of like who that player is um, on the team. You know what I mean? Like how's Kyrie as a teammate? If you ask me and I'm his teammate, I'm going to answer that question. I'm not answering the question, where do you stand on his vaccine stance, or the fact
right.
that he ordered Mein Kampf off Amazon, to like, like the guy's out there. He's on some intellectual journey that I don't want to be on, but as a teammate, he might be a lot of fun. He might be a guy that, treats your family well, that, shoots hoops with your kids after a shoot around, and takes time to sign autographs. He might be a really good guy to play with, but you might not agree with some of the stances that he's taken. And I think also, like, you bring up the vaccine stance, like, this is the Aaron Rodgers thing that I think Aaron's always like, people hate me because of the vaccine. And just me being honest, I don't hate Aaron Rodgers personally. And I also don't think it's just the vaccine with people. Like, Kirk Cousins didn't take the vaccine. Kirk Cousins was like, I'm not taking the vaccine. And then he went and played football, and people forgot, right? But when all you talk about is the thing, eventually there's a fatigue, and there's this forced conversation that people are going to be on the other side of. And so I think, like, the Aaron example is an example that speaks to, it's not just that, it's how you go about it. And so I think that's also separate. When you hear Aaron Rodgers and teammates talk about Aaron Rodgers, like, guys like him, that people, it also helps that the guy's got a fucking jugs machine on his shoulder. So of course I like having a guy like that on my team. And that speaks to the fact that, like, for professional athletes, it's not really about what the person stands for all the time. It's about what the person does on the field. And that's the value to a teammate. And I think for Kyrie, like, and anybody, I'm not saying I was like him when I was younger, but people go down roads, and people chase threads that they might be dead ends, and they might be disruptive, and they might be thought of as like, man, this is a bad train of thought. But people can also change. And I think, young people, like, in their 20s, like, they're going through a lot. I think Kyrie's probably calmed down a little bit. That was a crazy few years for everybody, right? And I think we all have opinions. That's not to say our opinions have changed, but I think also people can grow and realize that, hey, maybe I was going about things the wrong way. And so watching Kyrie after one of these games up at the desk with Chuck and them, if you watched him in a vacuum, you'd be like, this is the happiest, most friendly guy, in the NBA. Who wouldn't want to play with this guy? And that's who he probably is to his teammates in Dallas. They're not thinking about what he tweeted 3 years ago. Like the general public is, because that's our throughway to these guys. But for these guys on the Mavericks or some other team that Kyrie played on, their reality is the Kyrie they see at the stadium.
There's so many interesting threads in this conversation. Number one, whether we're in sports or we're in media, talent wins. It just does. And you're going to be managed differently. You're going to be portrayed differently. You're going to be handled differently when you are a game-changing talent. That's just how it is. You see it at ESPN. You see it at Barstool. You see it on the Mavericks. You see it on the Celtics. Everybody says it. Nobody denies it. You just manage people differently when they are game-changing talents. And that's not going to change. I think what's interesting with people like Aaron Rodgers, with people like Kyrie, is they will consistently try to outsmart and try to explain their position in a way. Kyrie used to do this, Aaron Rodgers still does this, that is overtly arrogant to the point that it is insulting to everybody else who is listening, because they can all recognize the truth of what is reality versus what these people are saying. And again, like, we don't have to like Aaron Rodgers. All that has to happen is Aaron Rodgers has to perform on the field. And I guarantee when the Jets are 4-0 to start the season and Aaron Rodgers has already thrown for 1,500 yards, the back page of the New York Post every day is going to be about how great Aaron Rodgers is. And when he starts having press conferences, whatever he's saying is going to be silly and funny because, oh, he's so kooky, but what a good quarterback.
Yeah.
That's just the way it's going to be.
And there's also the, like, why are people bringing this stuff up again? And then you're the one bringing it up half the time. You know what I mean? Which I think can happen as well with a Rodgers or a Kyrie. It's like things could be going good, and then you make a snide remark trying to take a victory lap on something that maybe it's not even a topic that's been resolved yet or something like that. And then there's the, hey, they're trying to cancel me, which no, they're not. Like, here, I think here's what I think about Aaron Rodgers. Amazing quarterback. Interesting guy. I don't agree with everything he's ever said, but I don't banish people like that. Like, I really don't. But after he received a lot of criticism, he said, hey, they're going to cancel me. I'm climbing in my cancel coffin. 6 months later, he's on the match. Like, I don't know where this concept of cancel culture comes from, but it might apply to a high school teacher. It doesn't apply to somebody who can throw the football like Aaron Rodgers or shoot a basketball like Kyrie. And it's obvious when you look at the arc of these couple athletes that, like, they ain't canceling these guys. You're too good to be canceled, man. You're too good at what you're doing to be canceled. So that's a that's a claim that you can't really back up.
It is funny though, like Bill Simmons even talked about it. Like, Kyrie went for 1 first-round pick. Like, that's all the Mavs paid. And obviously they moved Brunson, they moved the guys, but like, you think this guy's, I mean, he's what, 30, 31. If he wasn't so talking about the earth being flat, like you said, he was saying crazy shit in 2020.
Yeah.
That, I mean, it's so funny looking back on it where it's like,
well, I'm looking at
the perception,
window,
like,
Simon, and I don't see a curvature.
yeah. No, someone's like, he went to Duke. How? It's like, yeah, he didn't go to Duke. He played at Duke for 6 months, brother. I mean, take it down a notch.
Yeah.
But look, that is part of the problem, right? Is there are
Right.
people who are super smart, super confident. They believe they are smarter than other people and that they can pull the wool over people's eyes. And Aaron Rodgers and Kyrie did the same thing. They both couch what they're saying, which can be incendiary and can be challenging for people to hear. They couch it in intellectual discovery, in a journey of curiosity.
Yes.
I actually thought Travis Kelce, after the Harrison Butker comments at the commencement speech, handled it brilliantly on their podcast.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't claim.
Yeah.
He was great. He's like, I don't agree with anything he said. The way I grew up, I saw a mom and dad equally involved in raising our family, a mom and dad equally involved in supporting our family. That's not what I see the world as. But when I've been in the locker room with Harrison Butker, he's been a good teammate. He's been kind to the people I bring to meet him or people who are connected to me. And I'm not going to police his thoughts. Like, that is his thought. It's what he believes.
It's why we love America.
Right.
Right.
So,
well, it's one of these things where if you guys know hundreds of people in your personal circles that don't have microphones, and you would count 85% of them as good people, right? That you're like, hey, that person, if I were stranded on the side of the road, would pick me up. If I had to drop my kids off, I could do that. Maybe if I needed money, I have friends that. But if you gave them all a microphone and asked them to talk about whatever their philosophies are, they would be held to a different scrutiny because that's not the standard for most people walking around, right? You know, we're not going to get like a State of the Union on everything they believe every week. And so I do think that like athletes are given this opportunity to talk about things that they're passionate about or some learning journey they're on. And we're like, oh shit, what? Oh, I didn't want to hear that. Well, we don't ever have to hear that with most people walking around, right? And so I would say this, like with Harrison Butker, from Kyle, from anybody that played with him, my brother, you know, good guy, right? Like I'm sure if I needed help or, you know, I needed Harrison Butker to do something for me and he was a teammate, he would do that for me. I don't agree with what he said at all. And for Travis Kelce, I'm glad he handled it that way, because the last thing you want to do is say, kick this guy out of the league. That fuels the fire for the warped sense of reality that like we're just canceling people in the NFL. Harrison Butker, people said they were trying to get rid of Harrison Butker. And yeah, there are some people that were like, get him out of the league. But he was also the highest selling jersey 2 days after he said what he said. So like we often frame these situations way wrong, where it's like this person's under attack. I don't know if you notice this, but for every person that loves you, there's somebody that hates you in this country. If you speak on issues and you give your philosophy on something like that. So I just would say like that this is America, man. People have a bunch of different, and if every NFL player got up there with a microphone, you'd hate half of them. But everybody doesn't have a microphone. And that's my point, is like most people are good to the standard of like, can I rely on this person? Is this person a bad person? But they might have some fucked up, warped views in my estimation. And for the most part, I don't have to, like my carpenter who I hang out with after he works on my house for 30 minutes and have a beer with, like, we don't get into world politics. Now, if we did, maybe we wouldn't like each other, but we're not forced into a conversation like that. And athletics now, we're in those conversations often.
Here's the most important thing that I want people to take away from this conversation. I think you're both wrong. I think the Celtics are probably the right bet in the finals.
Oh, that's gross.
Yeah.
That's really,
you know what? Part of it is sentiment. Look, I love the Mavs. I love Luka. I love the way Kyrie plays. I love the way players adore Kyrie. You always know a player is great. Like the way players talk about Kyrie with such awe, his ball handling, his shot making, his skill level. It's the Celtics' time. This team is really good. And this is going to be their one moment where they can win the finals in a transition year where the T-Wolves are going to be better. The Nuggets are going to get deeper.
yeah.
The Grizzlies are going to come back. Like that West is going to be stacked. I think this is their only shot to do it. And that, by the way, the Sixers are going to be healthier. Who knows what's going to happen with the Knicks? The Bucks are going to be healthier. Like, I think this team deserves it. I think they've been to the finals. They've been to so many conference finals. This is their shot. I think they need it. I think they take it.
And for the Celtics, with the road that they took to get here, you got to cash in.
You got to cash in.
Yeah.
This is their one moment. Speaking of cashing in, here is and Chris, you are uniquely qualified to answer this question. I contend Andy Reid could go down as being considered a better coach than Bill Belichick. And I feel like just because he has been an offensive genius and has come to sort of the muse / the engine for all of his brilliance late in his career, who knows how many more Super Bowls they're going to win. Belichick had Brady. Andy Reid has Spagnuolo, who you played for in St. Louis. Give me your take on a Andy Reid versus Bill Belichick. Who can go down as the greatest coach? Is there a chance for Andy Reid to go down as the greatest coach?
Sure. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to say that at the end of his career. I also think like it's in vogue right now to kind of tear Bill down. The Patriots, people hated him for a long time, right? Like for most of Simon and I's adult lives, growing up, teenagers, the whole thing, like it was the Pats. I remember when Al Groh was my coach, he was a Belichick disciple, like a Parcells guy in college. I hated the Patriots because he made us wear those stupid high socks with the stripes around them, just like the Patriots. We did everything. We had all the same signs on the wall. And I can remember going to Mellow Mushroom in Charlottesville, Virginia, and watching David Tyree catch that ball and going nuts. Or I can remember watching Donovan McNabb keeled over puking and being like, we let these guys off the hook again. So like, that's the reality for most people growing up, is like they couldn't wait to see that dynasty end. I look at the Patriots dynasty, instead of looking at it like, oh, they broke up. To me, it's like they had a marriage that lasted 20 years in a sport where the divorce rate is like 100%, right? And I think also what's impressive about the Patriots is there was almost a decade gap between Super Bowls if they don't pick that ball off. If the Malcolm Butler play doesn't happen, it's so hard to get back there year after year, let alone to get back there with totally different teams. And so I think with Andy's age, unless he's able to coach a long time, do the same thing that Bill did, where it's like you got to rebuild cores of your team and win with separate teams. To me, it's still Bill. And I think also people will say, hey, well, you know, he had Tom Brady, and that's fine. But how many of those Super Bowls were won on account of defense? He bookended his career with defensive victories. And I think also defense is this invisible thing that's like immeasurable, but it adds up to offense. You know, you talk about complementary football and the security of knowing that you're going to have good field position, that you're going to have time possession, that you're going to play the game on a script. I think a lot of that stems from having that defensive foundation. And so for me, it'd be hard to usurp Bill. But I can understand people making the case for Andy Reid, especially if they go three-peat, or if they take a break and they continue to do that. I would also say this, though, like, is it taboo to ask if Tom Brady in his prime is better than Patrick Mahomes in his prime?
They're so different. It is
Yeah,
tough.
it feels apples and
tough.
oranges.
I know, but like, I like both apples and
I
oranges.
know.
Both of them can win you championships in this scenario. Both are, in my opinion, that the two, when it's all said and done, it's going to be Mahomes, Brady, and you know, you can talk about the guys in the 80s and that
Yeah,
sort
Montana.
of.
You got to always throw Montana in there.
Yeah, and I don't like the comparison thing because context is always different, you know, around each player. And so this is a really inexact science when you're comparing two coaches or two quarterbacks. But I would say, hey, did they both have great quarterbacks? Yes. You know, including Donovan McNabb, just getting there, you know, all those times, because, you know, that's part of the Andy Reid lore, right? Like, you can't make this claim if you don't have the Philly chapter. Like, if you were just in a vacuum, if Andy Reid showed up and coached the way he's coached the last 10 years in Kansas City, we'd be talking about it as one of the greatest coaches of all time. But we wouldn't be talking about him as you know, competition for Bill. I think part of that is he exhibited he could win in Philly. Now, they didn't win the big one, but they were there repeatedly. And with this quarterback, Donovan McNabb, who was a very good player, but he wasn't Patrick Mahomes and he wasn't Tom Brady. So I think that counts in his column, but you also have to acknowledge the fact that he's always had good quarterbacks. Yes, he made Alex Smith look great, but so did Harbaugh, right? And so I look at things and I say, hey, if somebody wants to down Bill because he's a defensive coach, I would say, or he had Tom Brady, I would say, how'd they win, you know, a third of the championships? And in the game, in the seasons that they got there and put up big numbers in the Super Bowl, how many of those playoff games that they needed to win did they keep the points down? And I think, to me, that's why I would side with Bill. I also think there's something to like keeping that ship so tight for so many years. Like, you look at what's going on in Kansas City right now. And yeah, Bill had Aaron Hernandez and all that stuff happen. But Kansas City, it feels like every year there's something now. And now they could overcome that for sure. But you talk about a team that's got all these problems off the field, and they also lose Willie Gay this offseason, who was a huge part of that defense. You lose L'Jarius Sneed. And so work's cut out for him. We'll see.
It's funny. I appreciate you excluding me from the conversation about the Patriots have been good for most of your lives, yours and
Yeah, well,
Simon's, because
yeah.
I'm old, but
What are
also,
you, like 40?
dude, I'm 53.
So for you, the team growing up was who that you got tired of?
Well, I definitely got tired of, like, in the 80s, it was always the Niners.
Niners.
And then the 90s, when I started covering the NFL, it was Cowboys, Niners, Bills, Cowboys. Here's a story you'll appreciate. Uh, when we were talking about being lonely and being in a press box, I remember covering a Patriots game in the middle of the season, 94, 95. I was a young reporter at Sports Illustrated. Um, and I like Peter King, who is a legend. I'm sure, Chris, you know Peter. He just had a retirement party that I went to on Saturday night in the city. He had like sent me to cover some Patriots game. And Chris Slade,
Yeah,
former Virginia player,
coaches.
uh, was a great linebacker for the Patriots. And I had gotten news. He was in the middle of a contract dispute. I think Parcells was the coach. He was in the middle of a contract dispute in the middle of the season. I had got news that he was going to sign a new deal. And I was like, in the middle of the game, this is going on. I'm trying to confirm it with his agent. I get it locked in. I'm writing it in my column. Again, this is before the internet and like Twitter. And like, I have time to put it in my column for Sports Illustrated. And 4 days later, it still wouldn't have been broken by the time the magazine comes out. Right? And so, but it's like the Foxborough press box. I'm hungry. The night is getting late. I eat a fucking hot dog. It's definitely gray. And like it ends up being 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm at the whatever that Chateau Hotel is in Framingham, Massachusetts. And I am like puking my guts out, like trying
From
to
the
figure
hot dog?
out what's that?
From the hot dog?
From the hot dog. Like like I am in such bad shape.
Yeah.
That, by the way, if you want to talk about lonely, that is the depth of loneliness
Oh,
right
I
there.
got one. I got one. Here's lonely. St. Louis Rams, 2-14, 1-14, the whole thing. We come out season opener. This is like, we're gonna put it all together this year. I fucking have to have ankle surgery. My ankle got rolled up on, all fucked up. So I go to get an MRI the next morning. We lose to the Vikings by like 30. I go get my MRI. They're like, yeah, you're done, man. And I get in the car. It's 120 degrees. And I realized I forgot my phone at the MRI spot. And as I go to turn around, I notice my gas is on empty. So I run out of fucking gas on the side of Highway 40 with no phone in a walking boot. It's 120 degrees, and I gotta wait for AAA, whatever it was, dude. I'm sitting there. I'm like, this is rock bottom. This is like a football player's rock bottom. No phone. I'm gonna get heat exhaustion. I'm on IR, and I'm sitting on the side of the highway in St. Louis. People are stopping and asking me if I'm Chris Long and saying, what's wrong with the team? And then pulling off and keeping on going, dude. So it's like that to me was your hot dog story in Foxborough is my walking boot story in St. Louis.
We have just
Everybody hit
written
rock bottom.
we've written the greatest country song ever just now. And when you
Oh
just
yeah.
said what's wrong with the team, people were stopping you. In my head, I saw a big headline in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch with a big picture of you on the side of the road with a walking boot. And it just said, what's wrong with Long?
What's
And
wrong with Long, dude? A lot is wrong with Long, dude. That was the beginning of the end for me in St. Louis. It culminated with us getting beat by the Bucks in our color rush, all yellow uniforms in front of 15,000 at the Edward Jones Dome. Yeah,
I was gonna say it was like it's a reverse Tony Romo. Tony Romo was stopping, helping people change a tire. Chris is over here in a walking boot, talking
I'm in
about
a walking boot.
shit.
I can't go anywhere. People are just. I'm like, yeah, can I get a ride? Like, no. Could you tell me what the
well,
fuck is wrong with y'all's team?
you've been through coaching changes. And so, especially obviously with the Rams, most specifically, a lot of coaching changes in
Yeah.
the NFL every year, sometimes during the season. How important is it when a new coach comes into a team that's clearly sick of its current leadership?
It's a golden opportunity because if you can be the rebound guy off of a guy that everybody hated, man, whatever you do, people are gonna, soak it up like a sponge immediately. Now, what you have to do though is show results. It doesn't have to be winning immediately, but what you have to do is show the little results week to week where the light bulbs are going off in people's head and saying, "Oh, this is different." Like, the scheme's different. The way you're taking care of us is different. The whole thing. So I think it's a big opportunity for a coach to follow. Like when Doug followed Urban Meyer, it's a fucking layup. I've won a Super Bowl. This last guy was a clown. You can walk in a building and be. I think it's harder, obviously, for a guy like Gerard Mayo, man. Where I can't tell if people are going to be patient because they understand, or if they're going to be really impatient because they're Patriots fans. And and Simon's nodding, and I would agree it would be the latter. But it is interesting when you look at these vacancies. And Ben Johnson talking about why he didn't take a job is very interesting, right? And he's playing the odds and he's handicapping guys, and he's saying there's going to be 5 of these guys who are going to be out of jobs in the next 3 years. And so it really speaks to how selective you have to be when you take these jobs. But I think what's unfortunate for NFL coaches is they've been working their whole lives. So you tell a guy who's been working for 25 years in an industry, sleeping on the couch and shoveling shit, that he shouldn't take a job because he's going to follow somebody who's set an unrealistic bar, or that the GM's not a great GM, or the cash situation is fucked up in a particular place. Like, guys are going to jump at the opportunity to take jobs, and not all of them are equal, and not all the situations, as you put it, are as easy to walk into.
I know Simon has season win total questions he wants your take on.
Yeah, let's do it. I love these.
I want to clear the floor for Simon to get into it on that.
I bet 5 of them like every year, and I go like 3-2.
By the way,
good, though.
That's winning.
I'd take that.
I'd like to just stick to like 1 or 2 and bet big.
No, that's the exact opposite. You go with the 5, win 3-2. This is the problem, Chris. This is the problem with today's culture. Everybody wants to go cash that lottery ticket. Mm-hmm. We're in this for the long haul. We want to be able to have money the next year to continue to bet. You're not going to hire the landscapers to plow your 85 acres in the middle of Virginia farm country by betting big on 1 season win total.
No, you're right.
Build it up.
Steelers.
There you go. Simon, Simon, go ahead.
I would love your Chris's take on this, where I feel like I'm on an island with all the other professionals, that we are all in on the fade of Green Bay this upcoming season. And it's funny hearing the media painting Jordan Love with such love and such praise after, he played all right for half a season. But if you go back and look at their schedule, the end of the season where they snuck by, they beat the Panthers 33-3. And then the next week they beat the Vikings and their 5th string quarterback. And then the final week of the year, they beat the Bears 17-9, right? Okay. Yeah. Jordan Love made the playoffs. He did great. Them having a meltdown by Dallas and then catching a 49ers team that was, sleepwalking in the first half. It's given people this false security and this false hope that Jordan Love is the next Aaron Rodgers. And this Green Bay team is, an easy bet to make the playoffs this year, where they fit every criteria of young, inexperienced team that got to the playoffs too fast the year before. Now they're over 9.5 as a negative number, which means, again, it might be minus 140 at this point. I can bet them plus 120, plus 130 to the under 9.5. So to me, this jumps out as a young team that just overachieved the year before. Now their division's way harder, and it's still being talked about as if they're a shoo-in to get in. I would love your view on this Green Bay team, Jordan Love.
Well, I really like the team. Like, I see why people are jumping out of the gym for him. When you look at Jordan Love last year, it was like sometime in November they hit a switch. And they said, hey, you can run the offense. We'll take the training wheels off. And he was really good. And I also thought there was room for improvement. Like, he didn't play great that Giants game, but he rebounded. And if you remember, that was right off the Chiefs game which
Yeah.
I thought was as big boy a win as they had last year. Like, I mean,
you remember that Saints game? Me and Chad, we won it by a point and a half, but they came back down, whatever it was, 2 touchdowns. And again, they only made the playoffs by a game. So it's like, that's my whole issue is, what would they be if they lose that? They don't make the playoffs. What's their win total? 8.5?
Like, because then you never get to see them play the Cowboys so
exactly.
tough.
Public perception.
But also, to me, that was a really good proving ground for them. I think when you look at like their offense, I worry a little bit about getting rid of Aaron Jones. What are you going to have out of the backfield, right? Like Josh Jacobs in the same receiving threat. I think when you look at the offensive line, there's experience there. I really like the outside guys, obviously, right? Everybody does. But I think Jordan Love's really good. And I think the big question mark for them is, can they stabilize defensively? Because they have a lot of talent on defense. Last year, I think the thing got them in trouble. Like if you look at that Bucs game, the Bucs played their best game of the season against those guys. It was
so
like
the Panthers put up 30 points against the
Yes.
And this is late season Panthers, like when they were just falling apart. It's crazy to think.
That was the game that Jair came out for the coin toss, one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, right.
He was like, Coach didn't know I was from Charlotte. Okay? but I guess I would just say this: like a bunch of teams had their best game offensively against the Packers, and that's not going to happen next year. At the very least, they're going to get better. If you look at their schedule this year, like, yeah, it's there's no shoe-in easy wins. I mean, I'm looking. That's the thing about this year that I think is funny. There's not a lot of teams that I'm like, that team's dog shit. Like in their division for sure, Packers or Bears, Vikings, Lions, the whole thing. But they're going to play the Seahawks out of division. They're going to play the Dolphins out of division. They're going to play the Niners out of division. They're going to play the Jags down there. They're going to play the Eagles in Brazil. They're going to play the Texans. They're going to play the Cardinals, who are going to be scary. I don't mean like they're going to make a run, but
no, but that at all the games you said, that's their easiest game. The Cardinals are pretty good. That's what I'm trying to drill into people. It's like
we love the Cardinals this year.
They are. The wins are really hard to come by, and when you look at their win total, it's not that higher. It's not that much higher than the wins they had last year, and you're like, why wouldn't they get better? But this is the NFL, and when you look at this year, I do think there's a lot of competitive teams or teams that are trying to be competitive. And, look at the Titans, for instance. I was just doing this with the Bears and their win total. And like me and Kyle were going, game to game. And I was like, yeah, that's a loss. Like they're going to open with the Titans. That's a loss. I just don't think people understand. Like people were up in arms. The Titans, like it was such an afterthought to them. I'm like, I don't know if you noticed this, but the Titans think they're good this year. And that's going to be the first game of the season. And they're going to have L'Jarius Sneed and Jeffrey Simmons. And they're going to have, they're going to have a really good secondary. And Levis has been slinging the ball around. Like, I just don't think people understand these wins are not free. So when you look at win totals, you can't look at the number and just be like, yeah, it doesn't seem high. You got to look at the schedule. And you got to look at like some of these other teams who have peaked, quarterbacks who have had a really good season. And then the next year they kind of come back down to earth. So I'm probably going to stay away from the Packers, man.
Do you have one or two that you do like?
Well, I did like the Steelers, right? I forget what they are.
8.5.
Yeah, I like the Steelers. What are the Texans?
Steelers. Do you like the Steelers over or under?
Over.
Okay.
Yeah, I like
Texans were 9. I believe they're 9.5, 10 at most books now since the Diggs trade.
Texans are going to win 12, 13 games.
Wow.
I think the Texans are that good.
Even with the target, man, CJ is running his mouth right now.
I think he's different. I really do. I think he's different. And I also love the fact that he's like, you can tell the guy loves ball.
Yeah.
It's the same way when I watch Micah Parsons, and Micah will piss people off because he talks a lot.
Yeah.
But I love that. Like Micah takes the locker room right to the microphone, where like these are the same conversations that guys are vehemently arguing over in the locker room. And Micah loves it. And CJ loves it. I saw him the other day talking about Matt Stafford. The way he was defending Matt, the Leo gif, where he's from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like, that's the way I was. I was like, bro, I watch film too. Like, the other 4 guys in the room were like, they were gaslighting him. He was talking about Stafford, and he was like, Stafford's as good as like Brady was at the end of it. And when you watch Stafford last year, if you really watch the film, the motherfucker was elite. Like, you couldn't find me a better quarterback going into the playoffs than Matt Stafford, and who was playing better. And so, like, I love watching CJ Stroud get passionate about this stuff, and it kind of brings the football fan out in me. So I don't think I think CJ is going to be fine. I think the Texans are a good one. I think the Titans might make more noise than people think. I think the Cowboys under is a good bet. I don't even know what that number is, but if
It's
it's
10.5, I think it's -140, -150 now, just because you're right. The pros, they're agreeing with it. They've come in on the under on the Cowboys.
I don't know what are the Cowboys? What's their identity? What are they good at this year? Like, offensively, right? And when you talk about their strengths, subtracting Dan Quinn and trying to figure that thing out, like, I don't know. That wide receiver core, if CeeDee Lamb pulls up with a hamstring, it's thin. And that running back stable is pedestrian. So I look at the Cowboys and I say, hey, even if it's like -140, I might take the under on the Cowboys. I don't know what the Bills are, but I think people are counting them out. I think.
What about the Jets for that division? You feeling good about the Jets at this point with that division, or you're not drinking the Kool-Aid yet?
Injuries. It's just I worry too much about a team that last year had a bunch of problems with injuries, and then
mathematically though, Chris, that's good because it usually balances.
You
Like
think
historically, yeah.
Injury luck.
Yeah, but it's about depth too, right? Like, again, Aaron Rodgers, 40 years old, coming off an Achilles. If he's
they got Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor, though, our boy. I know.
That's true. That's
no question. They have a high floor because they're used to playing in fucked up situations.
Yeah.
But like, even if Aaron stays healthy, you bring in Mike Williams, he's had injuries. You bring in Tyron Smith, he's had injuries. You've got a bunch of guys coming back off of and I just think the Jets are too patchworky for me. And last year, when they were healthy at the beginning of the season, I said they could go to the Super Bowl. I think they were my AFC pick before Aaron tore his Achilles. But I just think there's so many things that can go wrong from an injury standpoint. Now, I just don't count the Bills out. When you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, we've been seeing this happen for a long time where you can't pay the wide receiver and it's an okay deal because you've got a generational talented quarterback. I mean, look at the Chiefs. I'm not saying they're like the Chiefs, but people didn't think the Chiefs are going to be okay after Tyreek left. There was a faction of people that thought that. And 2 Super Bowls later, they're just fine. They figured out a way around it because they have that guy. And I think when you talk to Brandon Beane, we had Brandon Beane on the show, that offense, the second half of the season, wasn't running through Diggs. And that's what made it better. They realized, we got this guy Kincaid, who's like a real receiving tight end out there. We're going to run this thing through the 2 tight ends. We're going to get the ball to the backside of the backfield. You saw a lot of that H trade stuff they do to really put linebackers in a bind. We're going to run the ball. Look what they did to the Cowboys. And guess what? This Curtis Samuel guy, he was with Joe Brady. And, this kid from Florida State, Keon Coleman, we don't know. He could be a 1,000-yard guy. And so that's what they're banking on. We're going to run the offense through the tight ends, and somebody's going to step up at wide receiver. And how much different is that team really? I worry more about the losses of guys like Mitch Morse and people like that, but I think Sean's going to be able to figure it out defensively. And I would look at the Bills total.
It's funny you mentioned the Titans. Simon and I have had this conversation about the Titans +4.5 against the Bears in week 1, which I like a lot. I think the wise guys are sort of coming around.
Remember, I keep saying people wait. This is going to hit 6.
Right,
Hard knocks.
Right. Like,
it's just going to keep growing.
It's going to go up. But The Titans to me are an interesting team. You mentioned Jeffrey Simmons. When he is playing, he is an elite defensive lineman. And you mentioned they've improved their defensive backfield. Also, fans don't recognize the impact an offensive line coach like Bill Callahan can have. There's a reason he has had a job for 30-something years in the NFL, doing this one thing, going from place to place. There's a reason the Browns were so dominant as a rush team, and people liked them no matter who was playing running back. Like, explain what someone like that on a coaching staff who not a lot of people know can do for a team.
Well, most O-lines are made up of a few guys that you're like, they're not studs. I mean, they're interchangeable. We can, there might be a swing guard that you make work or a rookie that, and I think what a guy like Bill does is he puts people in the right place. And when an offensive line is well coached, the ceiling is so high, right? Like the Eagles O-line's a poor example. They have a great coach and they have like monsters up front, genetically different cats. But there's a lot of really good offensive line coaches, and the Patriots and Scar for a long time, they're like, he would make groups of guys that weren't special athletes or, necessarily high picks serviceable. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with Stout individually, and I've seen it happen with Scar. And I've hung out in Paul Boudreau's O-line room for years when I was in St. Louis. Like, I know what it looks like when an offensive line is gelled and is well coached. And I think, like from a Bill Callahan standpoint, they're going to be able to run the football, right? And guys are going to be in the right positions to suit their talents. And I think, where another group might draft a guy and the coach isn't worth his salt, and you might have a guy at guard when he should be a tackle, or maybe the guy's a left guard and he's playing at right guard, or, maybe it's a combination of two guys that aren't working well together. And this guy's seen it all. So I think when you look at, like, if there was one position group with a young quarterback, a second-year guy, and an infusion of talent around him, that you want to just say, hey, set it and forget it, hire a guy like Bill. And I think you'll get the results. So their total 6.5. I like the over on that. I like the under on the Giants. I don't love it, but I like it. And I'll give you another one, the Chargers over. 8.5 games. They're going to be a better football team than were last year. I don't care who they had to shed, because coaching is important in this league. And
does it make you nervous? I think they've spent $5 million on the D-line.
Yeah, it makes me a little nervous.
That's a little scary.
No question. But
they might be giving up 200 yards a game rushing.
Hey, but what's much different, than
That's
before?
True.
They've been porous, and on defense they've been out of sync. When they've been good on the back end, they're not so good up front, and vice versa. So I just think more than anything, if you bring in Greg Roman, you run the football. Justin Herbert to me is an elite talent. He's just got to realize it. And if Harbaugh can't get it out of him, I mean, he got it out of Alex Smith. You know what I mean? I feel like the Chargers could be sneaky this year. So I like Steelers, Chargers. If I had to take an under, it might be the Giants, because I just don't feel like the Giants are taking it seriously this year. My theory is that they're ready to hire Bill in a year.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, what they do, they didn't go out and get better. It just feels like they're like, all right, we're going to eat this Daniel Jones mistake and figure it out in a year.
I
want to hear that, but
it's like, look, everyone last year was like, Dayball's a genius and he was coach of the year, and look what he did with Daniel Jones. So it's going to be an expensive proposition to get rid of Dayball and then bring in Belichick. But also, boy, that would be
4 games.
Bring it back. Like,
if they go under on the win total, they're going to fire Daboll.
Oh, 100%.
And that's a very, I understand the New England thing, but at least you're going offense to defense. And I think Bill's like a rule breaker where you're like, hey, with his history in New York, I could see that being a romantic idea for them.
I think
you're right there. The whispers are Philadelphia Sirianni doesn't work out. Bill apparently got dinner with the owner, like whatever it was, 3 weeks ago. So the rumors around here are going crazy about Belichick and the Eagles.
Yeah, seats are a little warmer this year.
Yeah.
Speaking of seats being warm, before we let you go, I want you to respond to some NFL coaching cliches. Tell us what it really means. We talked about Micah Parsons brings the locker room talk to the microphone. Translate. He's in the best shape of his life.
So it's probably about a guy who hasn't been in the best shape of his life. It's probably a guy who at some point was in a doghouse. Although without a little more context, it could be somebody that
we're talking about Jordan Davis on the Eagles.
Yeah, this guy's had Jordan. He's in the best shape of his life. Like the elephant in the room is this guy hasn't been able to run in the third quarter, other than like running down Josh Allen in the rain against the Bills. Like, there's hope, right? There's hope. We've acknowledged the issue. We're working on it. We're running the big fella. Don't ask me any more questions about it.
Right? This guy makes plays you won't see on the stat sheet.
Yeah, I like this one because this is a coach sticking up for a player that might be really integral to what they do on the offense or defensive side of the ball, but fans might not understand. And maybe there's some heat, whether it's a draft pick or a guy who earned a big contract where he's not producing from a statistical standpoint. I was always a big pressure disruption guy, and sometimes I didn't get home. So I loved it when a coach would actually point out the fact that, like, hey, when Robert Quinn made that play, it was Chris. Or, that's a coach sticking up for a player that might not always show up on the stat sheet in the way that fans want them to.
All right, last one. We have to trust the process.
Things aren't good. Things are not good, but I don't have another answer for you. We're just going to keep doing the thing that I know how to do and that I said I'd do, because I don't have another plan. And please be patient with us.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. Like, when you're Ryan Daboll in week 10 and you're 3-7.
You can only say that year 2, though, of your tenure. After year 2, you can't trust the process anymore. You know what I'm saying?
No, totally. There's no patience. There is no process after year 2. The process after year 2 is you blow it up.
Yeah, you blow it up. And that's what Ben Johnson was talking about.
All right. As a reminder, the Favorites podcast is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays. And they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, or 18 and older in Kentucky. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, restrictions apply. I want to thank our very special favorite guest, Chris Long of the brilliant Greenlight podcast. Everyone should listen to it, especially during the season. That Monday show that you do, Chris, is outstanding. Really just great for digging in on football. So I hope people check it out. Simon and I will return with our next episode of The Favorites on the Action Network YouTube page Tuesday with special guest Robert Mays of The Athletic. Download us from Spotify, Apple Pods, wherever you get your pods. Rate, review, subscribe, leave us 5 stars, say whatever you want. Feedback is a gift. Until next time, love you.